Hi, this is Lacey.
And Robin.
And we're in Glasgow at COP26, week 2, day 2. One topic that we wanted to bring to you is a sort of buzzword or concept that keeps coming up in a lot of sessions. But I haven't heard anyone really unpack what it means and why it's important. So for people that may not be familiar with this topic, I think it's important for us to do that. And I know that it's something when you were at UCL, you talked a lot about, and it was kind of a surprise to me at first. So the topic is just transition, or sometimes it's called inclusive climate action. It's kind of in the camp of inclusive economic development. And when I first heard about this, I thought, well, what the hell, like, what is it? What's different between like a transition versus a just transition? If we just transition, isn't that good enough? Like, what could be unjust about a transition? So we unpack it a little bit for us.
Yeah.
What does it mean?
There's a lot that can be unjust. Essentially, right now, the way that you transition is you buy an electric vehicle, right? You buy an expensive Tesla, or you buy a
Porsche Taycan Cross Turismo.
Correct. Or you get solar panels, you get batteries.
Or I buy my nice like vegan leather pants.
Yes, and
right.
you essentially you modernize your home for 100,000 euros, right? All of those are like luxury products, right? So essentially, by getting then by the upper scale of the population actually decentralizing and getting access to clean energy and to clean mobility, etc. You're then spreading the costs of the remaining dirty infrastructure on the people who couldn't afford those solutions in the first place. So essentially, the fixed costs of the old infrastructure are still there. That means the unit costs, so the cost per kilowatt hour, are going to be higher for the people who cannot actually afford the clean solutions, right? And also, you need to have, if you want to get finance for clean energy, so your own solar, etc., you need to have a good credit score, right? So again, you're going to be left behind if you have a bad credit score. Your costs increase, which put you in a worse position. And then also there's kind of policy design, tax design, right? Like the gilets jaunes in the yellow vests in France, right? When you just apply cost increases that result from increases in the carbon price onto the whole population, right? People don't like it, right? So
they get applied evenly.
Yeah. Right? So that is, it's better to apply it evenly than to favor those, to give subsidies to the rich. Which is essentially what we're doing now, right? We're giving subsidies to the rich, which is problematic, right? We need to think the opposite way, and we're still far away from that.
That's interesting. And John Kerry talked about this a little bit, right? So he talked about a bit about the tax structure in the U.S. and sort of unequal weighting. So basically giving more incentives to people who are already more advantaged and fewer incentives to those who are less advantaged. So I thought his point was interesting as well on this topic.
I don't remember exactly what he said on that.
Oh, he talked about how the tax book was like this tall. And
how basically a lot of the tax code was designed for corporate loopholes.
Exactly, and he said, you'll find in those pages, on almost every page, a phrase or a line that was like specifically written for one person or like for one company, right? It was basically everybody but them will pay this tax, right? So I think that's an interesting topic, kind of across the board, but it's one area where a transition could be quite unjust without realizing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it extends on a country level as well, right? Like the people in sub-Saharan Africa who will be hardest hit by climate change, right? They don't have access to financial infrastructure
and I think that's kind of the second layer of this, right? So there you could have a transition, you could have an inclusive transition where maybe somebody in a market in Africa has access to the technology, but maybe it's unjust, and then you could have just transition. So maybe going back, like let's just assume maybe a step back in terms of like inclusive economic development or inclusive climate action. So I think kind of the circles almost overlap, right? Just transition and inclusive transition.
And this is going to become a massive topic if this COP succeeds to actually to solve or to fix Article 6, right? To set the global carbon price, then the implications of that will be that there
Somebody
will be tax, etc., etc., and traditional fossil fuels will get more expensive. And it's already a pain in Europe globally the last couple of months, the inflation in energy prices, and there was this question on how do you make sure that people don't have to decide between heating and eating this winter, right? Yeah. And then there was also the question to John Kerry whether climate change is an elitist topic and whether we leave the large swaths of the population behind. And he said, well, actually, we can create a ton of jobs, right? And I think that is the way out of this.
Through building a grid, there's a lot of manufacturing, architecture, engineering jobs required.
Putting solar on millions of roofs, retrofitting millions of buildings.
And he said also, like, doing nothing, most of the burden of non-action, maybe this was him or somebody yesterday, but that most of the burden of non-action would fall on the less developed countries, the poor. Like, the people who are affluent will be able to buy security, buy off-grid or independent energy sources. They'll have be able to get food and that sort of thing, but and move to somewhere that has less conflict, like out of cities. But people who are less affluent will experience the negative repercussions of non-action around resource scarcity, violence, all of the things that we imagine as a worst case scenario.
Yeah. And even in the global north, right, one of the main concerns of saying, okay, there's millions of jobs that we can realize, then the response is often, well, we don't have the skills. We have a skill shortage, right? And actually there was a session with people who plan and design and implement passive houses. And their point was, well, it's not actually complex technology, right? It's like properly insulating. Maybe we'll add ventilation, especially post-COVID, etc. But these aren't complex skills, right?
It's not like you training a coal miner to become a data scientist.
Correct.
Right. Yeah. No. And one example he gave was making sure the insulation meets in a building, right? Yeah. So it's not a huge jump in many cases.
I think that was very powerful. And so I think the overall message is it can be done. There still has to be some political will to have global carbon pricing. There still have to be the right mechanisms and basically the crowding in of private investments. But then we just got to get on with it.
Yeah. Super. All right. Thank you, and we'll talk again soon.